Hello and welcome. In this video clip, we're going to be completing Lab 2 of the vSphere Install, Configure, Manage course. I'm already logged into my student workstation. In this particular lab, we have a few different tasks. One is to look at some of the hardware features for ESXi. We're also going to configure the network time protocol client, and we're going to connect into Active Directory for authentication. So let's get started. I'm going to pull up my vSphere client, and I'm going to connect into ESXi 1, put in my credentials, and once that connects in, we will be ready to start actually doing some work. Right, we're in. I'm going to click on OK for no license at this point in time. Also, I'm going to maximize this application on the screen so we have a little bit more space to work with. To start with, I'm going to select Inventory. And in Inventory, we're going to see that over on the left, we'll have inventory objects, and then there'll be context-sensitive information on the right here, depending on what it is that we happen to be working with. Now, in this case, the only thing we have in inventory is our host, because we're connected directly to the host. I'm going to click on Summary just for a second so you can see that. We can see who manufactured this particular server. Since it's nested ESXi, that means it's a VMware server it's actually running on. We can see how many CPUs, how much memory, how much CPU is being used, how much memory is being used, how much storage. We'll get into all those things later on. For now, I'm going to click on Configuration. In Configuration, we have hardware at the top. There's software down here underneath. If we want to look at things like processors, we can select that. We can see what type of processors we have, how fast they are, how many there are. If we want to look at memory, we can see how much memory. We've got all kinds of other things for storage, networking, many of which we're going to configure later on. Right now, we're going to look more at software. So the first thing we're going to look at software-wise is DNS and routing. Let's select that, and we will see that the default gateway is set to 192.168.70.2. That's fine. That's the way that that was set up initially. If I scroll up here a little bit, we'll also be able to see the name of the machine, the domain that the machine is part of, and the IP address of the DNS server. And that was all statically configured before we imported the ESXi host, so that's absolutely fine the way that it is. We also are going to look at time configurations. So I'm going to select a time configuration over here in the software selection. Right now, time is not configured. We can see that the NTP protocol is actually stopped. So I'm going to make some changes to that. I'm going to click on Properties, and I'm going to enable the NTP client. In addition, I need to configure it. So I'm going to pop into Options. We can see that it's set right now to start and stop manually. I'm going to set this so that it starts and stops with the host. So it's going to start every single time the host loads up. And we have to tell it where the NTP server is. So I'm going to click on NTP Settings. I'm going to add in a host. In this particular case, the NTP server is going to be infrastructure. Oops, need to spell that correctly. .itss.local. This is basically pointing to our domain controller, which can perfectly act as an NTP server. I'm going to specify I want to restart the service when we apply these changes. We'll say OK. And you can see some messages flying up down on the bottom here. I'll say OK once again. We can now see the NTP client is running, and it's going to synchronize with infrastructure.itss.local. This is going to take a couple minutes to refresh. It might be there, not quite yet. We'll go on to the next step while that's taken care of. It's doing a synchronization. The next step that we are going to concern ourselves with is setting up our server so that we can authenticate against Active Directory. To do that, we look at Authentication Services over here in the Software section. So I'll pick Authentication Services. Right now, we see that it's local authentication. What that means is users that we authenticate with are contained on the ESXi host itself. Now, by changing this, that doesn't mean that goes away. It simply means we're going to add in additional domains that we see nothing down here in the bottom for domain settings. Again, I'm going to specify properties. Pull this over in the center a bit. So we can see that our domain is local authentication. I'm going to hit the drop down, pick Active Directory. The domain is itss.local. We do not have a proxy, so I'll tell it I want to join the domain. I need a username in order to authenticate in. That is going to be the student and my password. And then once that is finished, we will be connected into the domain. I'll say OK. And there we are. We're now in the itss.local domain. What that means now is we can authenticate into this machine either with local accounts like the root account that we're using right now, or with any account from the ITSS local domain that has administrative rights. We haven't set that up yet, so we can't really do that at this point in time. Basically, that's it for this particular lab. Now, the second ESXi host, ESXi2, also has to be set up. You've already seen how to do that. It's exactly the same as ESXi1, so I'll leave you to do that on your own. That's it for this particular video. Hope it's been useful, and we'll see you next time.